Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the unsolved Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. I'd just like to let you know, I mean no disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about today. I've just gathered the information off the internet and compiled it into one video for educational purposes. In the summer of 1977, three young Girl Scouts, Lori Farmer, who was 8 years old, Michelle Goose, who was 9, and Doris Milner, who was 10, were brutally murdered on their very first night at camp. They were supposed to stay for 2 weeks at Camp Scott in Mains County, Oklahoma. On Saturday, the 12th of June 1977, the buses arrived at Camp Scott full of children ready to start their 2 weeks at camp. They travelled from the Magic Empire Council building in Tulsa and headed around 50 miles east up to Camp Scott. The site was really quite large and it was very, very remote. It was around about 410 acres of land which it spread across. There were 140 children to 30 members of staff. And as with many Girl Scouts camps, they would split the area between kind of 10 camps which would be named after Indian tribes. There was around 7 tents per kind of one counselor in the group, and the girls were actually assigned the tents that they were staying in dependent on their age. These 3 girls in question were actually in the Kiowa unit. Now, apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, but they were in tent number 8. And from what I've seen of the pictures and things like that, the Kiowa unit was the most isolated. It was surrounded by dense forest. So it was the most isolated of all of them, and the tent that the actual girls were staying in, tent number 8, was the most isolated because from where the counsellor's tent was, I have an image of it so I will put that up, but where the counsellor's tent was, there was a shower block. And tent 8 was behind that, so you couldn't really directly see tent 8 from the counsellor's tent. There was supposed to be 4 girls in each tent, and I've read that there was only one missing 4 girls, which was tent 8, and that there wasn't the extra girl in there because of an admin error, and there was an imminent thunderstorm due. So I believe they basically figured that they'd sort it out in the morning, and this girl stayed the night in a different tent instead. So at around 6 PM, the girls ate the dinner. Everyone then retired to the camp because this thunderstorm was supposed to hit at 7. So they wanted everyone inside and sheltered against it before it did hit. So that's what they did. The girls went in, they were chatting, they wrote letters to the family because really there wasn't much else they could do. This storm was going to hit, they wanted everyone inside. So they just kind of made the time that they had and enjoyed the time in the tent with each other, chatting and getting to know each other, because that's pretty much all they could do at the minute. So like I said, tent 8 was obscured from view, but not only that, it was actually the furthest away from the counsellor's tent as well. Which I don't really understand because surely these counsellors are supposed to be watching over these children. Why would you put a tent that was obscured from the view? I don't really understand that at all. Anyway, with the isolation from the dense forest and the fact that this tent wasn't in view may have been why the murderer actually picked this tent, unfortunately. We just don't know really what the reason behind it was, but it would have made more sense to actually select that one, and that is the one they selected. So I'd just like to say that there is a lot of conflicting evidence out there and a lot of conflicting stories. This happened a long time ago. So I've tried to kind of get the one that is most prevalent. The one that appears the most is the one that I'm going to say to you guys, because again, it's really difficult when one website says something and another website says something else. So I've just tried my best with the information that I'm going to provide you with. So they kind of had a timeline, which is what I'm going to share with you now. There was a lot of lights and things coming out of the forest. So many councillors throughout that day, throughout that night, have said that they saw lights coming out of the forest. When they then shone their light to find out what it was, it disappeared. So to me, straight away that indicates that somebody's out there with a torch and not wanting to be seen. You're out there with a torch searching for something and another light shines on you. Immediately you cover it up, because if you don't want to be seen, then you hide it. As soon as they turned the flashlights off and redirected the light, it came back again. So it was very, very weird. It was around 10 p.m. that there was a light kind of heading directly for Kiowa camp. So a councillor who was working on a different bit actually saw this. They noted that it was heading towards this camp, so they went in to check that everything was okay, and everything seemed fine. At around 1:30 a.m, another councillor, Carla, stated that she heard a really strange noise coming from behind the tent, and when she shone a light towards it, it stopped. So, not thinking much of it, she just went back to her tent and went back to sleep. Then at around about 3 a.m, like I said, conflicting reports. One girl said it could have possibly been around 1 a.m, so we don't know about that one, but a girl heard another girl scream and it woke her up. So she woke up a friend in the tent and they listened out for anything else. They did not hear anything else, and so they went back to sleep. Another girl said she could hear someone crying out for the mother. People may not think that that is too odd, because they're going to be away from the parents for 2 weeks. Some of these children were quite young. Maybe they were missing the mother, and maybe someone was crying because they were missing the mother. Maybe it wasn't anything suspicious. There were some strange noises coming out of the forest that night, and councillors described it as kind of a low croaking sound, like a bullfrog would sound like. Numerous girls heard random things that night. They heard screams, they heard different things, but they didn't really tell anyone. And if they did, then it was the councillors who said to them, "We'll sort it, it's not for you to worry about, it's for us, we'll look into it," things like that. But you have to remember that these councillors were teenagers. If they did something that possibly you wouldn't have done, or something you might think strange of how they reacted to a situation, then you've got to just realise and keep in mind that they were basically just kids themselves. I have read as well that a girl in tent 7 said that somebody actually came in the tent. They opened it up, they had a quick look around, and then they closed it and they left. The girl said she was pretty confused, but nothing else happened. She didn't really think much of it, and so she went back to sleep. It seems like there wasn't really much of anything done for these strange noises and strange occurrences that night, unfortunately. Then at 6 a.m, a councillor went out for either a shower or a jog. I've seen conflicting reports once more. And that's when she came across a discarded sleep bag that was on the edge of the forest. She thought it was very, very weird. Why was there a sleeping bag out in the forest? Everyone should have been in their tents. It was just odd. So anyway, she approached it to get a closer look. And when she did, she saw the body of a girl lied on her back. She obviously screamed. It alerted the other staff to find out what on earth was going on, and they all came over. This would actually turn out to be the body of Doris Milner, who had been badly beaten and was partially naked, lied on top of a sleeping bag. They obviously contacted the police immediately, and I believe that was around about 7:30, and it didn't really take them that long to arrive. From what I could gather, staff began checking on all of the campers to make sure that everybody else was okay. And they even got the nurse. So the nurse came over, tried to check for a pulse on Doris, and unfortunately, she didn't find one. The police arrived, and this is when they found 2 more sleeping bags, not far from Doris. Inside, they found the bodies of Lori Farmer and Michelle Goose. Once more, varied reports and things. I've gone with the most common, and that is that all 3 girls were sexually assaulted. And some say that one was sodomized. But I can confirm that Michelle and Doris definitely were sexually assaulted. They had been gagged with their wrists tied behind their backs. Lori, however, wasn't bound or gagged at all. It's believed that Doris was gagged, bound, and then forced to walk kind of to the edge of the forest on the trail, where she would be sexually assaulted, bludgeoned, and then strangled to death. The police eventually came to the conclusion that Lori and Michelle's death was blunt force trauma to the head. And there was a lot of blood found in the sleeping bags, which is just horrendous to even think about. Doris was determined as her cause of death as strangulation. It was thought that Lori had been killed first, then Michelle, then Doris. Shortly after they'd been murdered, it's thought that they were possibly then moved 150 yards away from the tent, and that's where they then dumped the bodies. It's thought that 1 or 2 people came into the camp around about 2 to 4 a.m. and committed these horrible murders on these poor innocent girls. So the camp counsellors went and gathered all the children together. They kind of tried to distract them by doing activities. They didn't want them to go near the scene. They didn't even tell them that they were being sent home and that 3 girls had been killed. So they were just gonna keep them occupied and then wait for the buses to arrive to collect them. All the parents were told that they needed to come and collect the children from the council building because something had gone wrong. The really awful thing about this was that the parents of the children that had been killed were actually told that there had been an accident on camp. They attended a meeting in which they were told that the children had died. It wasn't actually until the media reports came out that these parents found out that the children had been murdered. So the camp representatives didn't even tell them that they'd been murdered. They had to find out from the media, which must have been absolutely horrendous. They were devastated at the loss of the child, accident or none. They were devastated. But then to find out that your child had actually been murdered by the media, not even the camp representatives having told them, they found out by the media. It's just so awful. I just can't even imagine. So when they cleared all the camp, this is when Camp Scott would be closed forever. I don't think that anybody really thought that the 12th of June 1977 would be Camp Scott's last. It closed and it remains closed to this day. It was never reopened again. Not only that, this kind of put a tarnish on Girl Scouts camps across the nation. And it really, really did affect their reputation. Now, a camp counsellor actually had a warning, if you can call it that. And it was very, very weird, stating that something like this was going to happen. So it was 2 months prior to this, in April. They were holding a training session at camp. All the counsellors were there and they were doing their training before the children came. One of the counsellors came back to the cabin to find that it had been broken into. It had been ransacked, and I believe that one report does say that some glasses were stolen. Now, whether that was actually true, I'm not sure. Like I said, everything's conflicting. But they said that they had a bunch of donuts in a box on the side. These donuts had all been taken, and in replace of them was a letter. It was a handwritten note, and it said, "We're on a mission to kill 3 girls in one tent." Someone had also created an effigy of a person being hanged from a tree by its neck, and that was also in the box too. The note, although it was disturbing and quite frankly frightening, it was dismissed as a prank. It was just thought that it was somebody messing around, that it was an idle threat, like you would do, and the note was thrown away. They didn't reach out to any of the parents of the children that were going to attend or anything like that, because, well, they didn't really think anything of it. So, although it did include this about the 3 girls, the note also was going on about aliens. And that's probably one of the main reasons why it was dismissed as a threat, as an idle threat. Because yes, this note has stated that they want to murder 3 children, but it's also going on about aliens, so you wouldn't really think much of it. The sad thing is that somebody did murder 3 girls in one tent. Obviously, we don't know if the person that ransacked it and left the note was the same person that actually murdered them, but it's just one of them weird little coincidences or facts that was related to the case. After all the children had left, the police obviously began a full investigation. But I believe that the scene wasn't really dealt with very well because they didn't initially secure it. So camp counsellors and things like that and the investigators were just walking around freely. They could have damaged any evidence or things like that. It just wasn't secured initially. But I do believe that the bodies were dealt with perfectly. They protected them so that nothing could get to them. So this happened in the 1970s. The forensics on bodily fluids and things like that wasn't really that great. So although they did take swabs from the girls, they didn't really find anything from it. If, say, this happened 20 years later or something like that, with technology being improved, they probably would have actually been able to use this evidence to possibly solve the case. But unfortunately, with the limited technology they had at the time, this case still remains unsolved. In the tent, there was blood on the floor, which indicated that the initial attack did happen within the tent, and then they were possibly carried outside. It was clear that the perpetrator had tried to clean up the blood with a bedsheet. It was smeared all over the place. That's all they really succeeded in doing. They also found a bloody footprint outside, which was believed to be a size 9 men's shoe. They found a red flashlight near to the bodies. This flashlight actually had a fingerprint on it, but it wasn't a fingerprint of anybody within the camp. They found a crowbar, black duct tape, and a long single black hair. There were signs that this attack was actually planned, and that possibly there was more than one perpetrator. Police found a ranch up from the camp, and in this ranch they went and searched it because it was quite close to the camp. They're looking for anyone they can, any leads they have, because they didn't really have very much. So they searched this ranch and they found the black duct tape and rope, which were very, very similar to what was used to tie up the girls. Now, the man who lived there was called Jack Sheriff, and he basically told the police that he'd been burgled, he'd been broken into, and these items that he had purchased recently were to replace the items that were stolen, and they were identical to what he had replaced them with. Also, he passed a lie detector test, and he had a very strong alibi for that night, so he was ruled out as a suspect. The police then got onto another suspect, who was called Gene Leroy Hart, and he was actually on the run at the time, having escaped jail for 4 years. He was on the run for raping and abducting 2 pregnant women in 1966. From what I could find, the women had been tied up, duct tape over their mouth and nose, and they'd been left in the forest to basically die. But luckily, someone actually found them and they did survive. Gene was actually raised around a mile from Camp Scott, so he would have known the area very well. There was also some items found in a cave that I believe were related to Gene somehow, along with an interesting note that was written on the cave wall. Gene was eventually caught by the police, and they were convinced he was 1000% guilty of these murders. He did end up on trial for it, but it was dismissed after the defense completely dismantled the prosecution's case. Literally, none of the evidence that they had collected matched Gene Hart at all. For example, the bloody shoe print, the size was much too small for Gene's. The fingerprint they found on the torch didn't match his either. It was things like that that just didn't add up, so it ended up taking only 6 hours for the jury to find him not guilty. Obviously, like I said, he was on the run, so he was put back in jail for the crimes that he'd committed previously. But not long after this, he actually died of a heart attack in jail at the age of 35. Many people believed, and still believe to this day, that Gene Hart was actually the perpetrator. They believe that, yes, okay, the shoe didn't match. What if there was more than one of them? I find it really difficult to believe that somebody could have done this crime alone. There were 3 girls, so how did they manage to keep control of all 3 of them whilst they were doing these things to one of them. Surely there must have been more than one person. And if that was the case, that could tie in with the bloody shoe print not matching Jean's, because it would have been somebody else. Maybe it was Jean that committed the crime and he had help. He had other people there who also committed these crimes, and that's why the shoe and the fingerprint and things like that didn't actually match. I've also read that the knots used to tie up the two girls look different, which could mean that they were tied by different people. There were also different things done to those two, so that kind of leads you to believe as well that there was more than one person. People also did worry that police kind of tried to pin it on Jean because of their frustration at him having escaped from jail. And they were worried that police did plant evidence to try and pin it on him. I'm not really going to go into the details of that because there's so much of it. And seriously guys, if you were interested in finding out more information on that aspect, then please do look into it because it is very interesting. And there's just so much information out there on it. So basically the case went cold. There were no new leads. There were just nothing. It was just so difficult to find anything. And I do believe that in 2008, they did try and analyse the bodily fluids again. I think they also tried to find out if the fingerprint had any matches. The fingerprint they didn't find had any matches, and they didn't find anything off the bodily fluids because the sample had just deteriorated that much over all of this time. So they just didn't find anything. Nothing came back from it. I have read somewhere that they found some DNA in a tent that belonged to a female, an unknown female, so that could maybe have an indication that there was a female at the scene that night. So, like I said, this case is unsolved. We still don't know what happened to these girls. We still don't know who did this to these girls. And I did find this case so sad. They were supposed to be in a safe place, enjoying themselves at camp, making all these memories, learning all these different skills, because obviously it was Girl Scouts. They would have had these skills probably for life, and they would have had all these stories to go home and tell the parents. The families were waiting for them at home, waiting for the children after 2 weeks to come home full of these stories of how much they've enjoyed camp and what they've learned, and none of that ever happened. And it's just heartbreaking. These girls literally got murdered on the first day of camp. How awful is that? They didn't even get to enjoy camp or anything like that. They just were taken. The lives were stolen, and it's just horrendous. I did find it quite heartbreaking that the camp closed down as well, because this camp had been running since 1928. For all those years, it provided these young girls with all these skills, all this enjoyment, and such an evil act forced it to close. And I really don't think it ever will open again. I think, unfortunately, the memory of these poor girls' murders will just tarnish it forever. You kind of hope, in a sense, that they would reopen it in the girls' memories, but it's been over 40 years now, so I doubt that would ever happen. I do believe in 1980, it got some new owners, so the old owners sold it on, and nothing's been done with it since. It's just been sat there overgrowing and nothing's been done. Personally, I do think they should have had possibly more staff to children ratio and not have any of the tents out of sight, like I said. But at the same time, people need sleep. These teenagers, these counsellors needed sleep too. Even if they could have seen the tent, it doesn't mean that this wouldn't have still happened. Horrible things just seem to find their way in, and they can still happen sometimes regardless of how much you try and prevent it. I really do hope that one day we find out who committed this crime and give the family the justice that they deserved. My heart really breaks for their families. They sent the children to a Girl Scout camp for 2 weeks and they never came home. And it's just so devastating. If you have any suggestions of the cases that you'd like me to look into, please do let me know, and I'll look into them for you. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!